Ruins of Aspis Prime stood silently under a rotten crimson-red sky. Sickly-looking dark-colored plants and vines crawled around the ruins of once great city. Deadly creatures stalked through the ruins, seeking prey or becoming it. The madness of a warp storm that surrounded this world until a few decades before could be seen in broken shards of glass scattered all over the ruins. Vehicles of all kinds were rusting in the streets, strange metallic flowers growing out of the rust, glittering with the memories of ancient, better times. Skeletons of humans and beasts were scattered all over the city, some of which were naked, some clothed. Many had signs of mutations and cancerous growths. In the heart of the capital stood a mighty fortress. In the days long past, great armored towers, crowned with anti-air emplacements and missile launchers, glittered in the sun. The gates were engraved with symbols of loyalty to Terra and the Golden Throne. 4 enormous anti-orbital cannons were placed on top of great bastions within the fortress walls. Barracks of the guard stood proudly in their dozens. In the local dialect of Low Gothic, it was known as Castro. It was once a symbol of pride, now a dark satire of itself. Great towers and walls were in ruin. Guns were eaten by rust. Engravings of loyalty were defaced or twisted in vicious mockery. 2 herds of Aquila attacking each other, pecking each other's eyes out in mad rage. Barracks laid in ruin or stood as burnt-out husks. Part of the fortress was missing, replaced by a crater where one of the anti-orbital guns once stood. The other 3 were aiming skyward, as if trying to scare off the warp storm that shone above them not that long ago. Fresh bodies of men and beasts hung from the walls on rusted chains. Small white flowers were erupting from the corpses' eye sockets and open wounds, as if they tried to hide the horror hidden beneath. Small fires could be seen inside the ruined fortress. Few lights flickered in dark corridors. Someone or something took this place and made it their home. The capital of Hoplitia seen better days. The world lost in the raging warp storm for 6,000 years was reduced from a thriving civilized world to a deaf world. A shattering boom echoed over the city. Things that were once man or beast looked up, their eyes full of madness and hate. A group of vessels cut through the rotten clouds, approaching the long-forgotten spaceport to the north of Castro. Things stirred inside the ruins of the fortress. Shapes moved out of the dark corridors and rushed to their positions, moving more on instinct than training. Impossibly, without logic or explanation, dozens of guns and turrets started to move, their rusted barrels raising up, ancient mechanisms awakening from eons-long slumber. Lights shone from mutant skulls placed on the control panels, as machine spirits chuckled, cried, and mumbled to themselves in shared madness that took this world. And then the guns opened fire.
Aha! You have expected continuation of the story, but it was me, heretical.hatter!
Okay, memes aside, small intermission and announcement. I put it here because I know many of you won't watch a small dedicated announcement video. I apologize. I will take only a small moment of your time. If you really don't want to hear what I'm about to say, you can skip ahead. I can't stop you. First thing, Damocles Gulf Crusade series is progressing nicely, and as it moves forward, I create more content to use later. Those who follow my posts probably notice that I'm creating significant number of Imperial Guard regiments and other Imperial units. Because even though this is a rewrite of Xenos lore, I want to give proper justice to the Imperium and their military forces. Why I'm telling you this? Simple. Give me your homebrews. If you have Homebrew Imperial Guard Regiment, Space Marine Chapter, Skitari Legion, Order of Sisters of Battle, or hell, just a character, send them my way through mail or using comment section below this video, or dedicated video where I will extend the same request to my viewers. Same goes for Xeno homebrews. If you have anything interesting which you would like to share, send it my way. I can't promise you that they will show up. The series is progressing and some fan creation might simply not fit into the story. But I promise to think about how to include them and actually try doing so. Second thing, as you probably noticed, I use a lot of AR art. And I do so because I literally do not have enough money to order an appropriate amount of official art for my series. So you can support me through Buy Me a Coffee, Ko-fi or Patreon, or you can send your art my way. I will give you full credit in the description. The same goes for fan art, if you have any. I will be happy to use actual art rather than AI art, but for now at least, my options are limited. With that out of the way, remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell, the whole thing. And now, let us get back to the story.
We are under fire, Inquisitor.
The calm voice of Ulrich Tassor sounded through the comms as the dropship jerked to the side.
Incoming fire from ruins of the fortress below. 3 Hydra turrets, rest are some kind of autocannons and heavy bolters.
Dropship jerked to the side.
And at least 1 las cannon.
Statement: operational anti-air weaponry is unexpected. A tall tech priest with spider-like legs tilted his head with interest, purple robe trembling as he started to move. By all accounts, those weapons should be non-operational. Inquiry: how is it possible that they are working after so many millennia of isolation?
A mystery for another day, old friend.
Baltic Otfar shook his head with irritation. Can we get to LZ, Ulrich?
Not a problem, my lord. Most of their guns are on the opposite side of the fortress. We will be outside their firing arc in a moment.
And as promised, mere seconds later, the sound of explosions outside the craft went silent.
We are in the clear.
Otfar nodded his head and turned on his vox. This is Prime Alpha. Did anyone get hit? He asked calmly. Prime Alpha, this is Tarot Alpha. The voice of Vikola Herat came through the vox. We are in the clear. The damn bastards scratched my beautiful dropship. A furious voice of Lady Captain Helena Vorhais blared through the vox. Give me a moment, Inquisitor. I will make just a little call to Eclipse of Avaris and reduce that heap of trash into a hole in the ground. Otvar stopped himself from letting out a sigh. Allowing the rogue trader to go on this mission was something he already regretted, but he had a need of her resources. Satisfying her urge for an adventure was just a way to keep her loyal and satisfied. An irritating solution, but a solution that worked well. "You will do no such thing, Lady Captain," Otvar said in calming voice. "For our target might be in that very fortress, and even if they are not, the mystery of how those people have still operational weaponry of this kind must be uncovered." A small grumble could be heard over the vox, before Helena regained her composure.
Very well. I shall do as you say, my lord. But I will call for more men at arms to join us. If those lunatics have access to those weapons, I will make sure our landing zone is secured and guarded until we return,"
she said with a note of irritation. "Very well, Lady Captain. Call for reinforcements. Warn them about the guns." Otvar changed channels. "Kill teams, report."
"Kill Team Nemesis reports in. No damage to our gunship,"
answered Sergeant Atroius Kane with typical for his chapter confidence.
"Kill Team Aegis reporting. No damage sustained."
A quiet and calm answer of Sergeant Kalin Tyros made even Otvar feel chill in the air. Sons of Korax had such effect on people.
"Kill Team Griffin. Fully operational,"
was the blunt answer of Sergeant Cassius Orlon. Otvar glanced at the small datapad in his hand. Only one gunship suffered a glancing shot and would need to go through field repairs on the ground. But even that small information made Inquisitor pause. They approached from very high altitude, intending to make few circles around the capital, scanning for signals and life forms, slowly lowering their altitude, trying to locate the Seeker. They were well beyond Hydra's effective range, and yet one of the dropship was hit, and by a gun that was most likely thousands of years old and not properly maintained. Was it just dumb luck, or skill of the gunners? He didn't even set a foot on this world, and he already had so many questions. "Get us to the LZ, Ulrich," Otvar commanded.
"Understood, Inquisitor. ETA, 2 minutes,"
was Pilot's short answer. Otvar turned to look at the retinue he took with him on this mission. Epsilon 34 Darren was quietly ticking in a corner, looking through datapads alongside his savant, Lyra Valek. They were already trying to figure out how was it possible that those guns were in working condition after 6 millennia of isolation. The brains of his retinue. Two towering shapes of Kraf and Traf Krell took a good portion of a dropship. They were mutants, almost as big as Ogryns, but rather than clearly humanoid, their bodies were covered in scales and their faces were almost reptilian. They were the muscle. Sarah Maraux looked over her medical equipment and personal weaponry. A trained medicae was always useful for any team, not to mention her previous career as a death cult assassin came in handy more than once in the past. And finally, Astra Kefris, his interrogator and protege. She was talented investigator and a good fighter. They met on Perfectia almost 3 decades before. Just as young Astra was trying to break into his personal speeder and steal anything of value within. He observed her as she had done the deed and with surprising speed stole only small valuables before carefully closing the door, leaving almost no trace of her visit, and made a run for it. She was a resourceful one, that's for sure. To steal just enough to survive, but not enough so that her action would be quickly discovered. He was also quite sure she was a low-level psyker. She was lucky, and those who tried to hurt her usually made small mistakes or had moments of misfortune. An incredibly valuable ability for a future Inquisitor. He took a liking to her, even above two other interrogators in his court who served him for far longer in the past. They lacked this something that Astra had, the natural intuition and instinct. Those were all who were on this dropship, but he also brought two teams of stormtroopers. Maybe an overkill when there was another Inquisitor and Rogue Trader with their own teams of misfits, their own stormtroopers and men-at-arms, and of course, 3 kill teams of Deathwatch. On the other hand, they were about to land on a Death World that was surrounded by a warp storm for 6,000 years, which most likely corrupted and twisted most of the living things on this Emperor's forsaken world. On a planet like this, he wasn't sure if anything could be considered an overkill.
We are approaching LZ, my lord. Thankfully, there is enough space for us to land. ETA 15 seconds.
Ulrich announced over the Vox. 3 Avarus Lighters, 6 Valkyries and 3 Corvus Black Stars slowed down as they approach what was once the spaceport of Aspis. The marks of ongoing evacuation from 6 millennia ago were still visible. Very few vehicles and landers remained on landing platforms, some of which were clearly sabotaged and detonated on the surface. Not far, a cordon surrounding the spaceport was breached. Broken barricades and rotting defensive turrets accompanied a small flood of skeletons. The desperate and the poor managed to break through the defensive line that kept the spaceport safe. But it wasn't clear if any of them managed to reach salvation. The Inquisitorial Task Force landed nearby, preferring to stay far from ruined buildings of a spaceport, but close enough to old barricades and fortifications that could be manned once more and ensure the safety of LZ. Masks on, Otfar commanded. His retinue did as instructed, putting on gas masks and other simulator apparatus. Apart from the tech priest, of course. The reason was simple. Warp could infect anything, even dust. He didn't want to find out if there was anything on this world that could turn people mad just by breathing in the air. Dropships landed with Deathwatch deploying first, creating a cordon. Inquisitorial stormtroopers dropping mere seconds later. Mortal and superhuman soldiers of the Imperium took their positions around the landing site, guns out. A few servo skulls flew out of the formation, their mechanical eyes scanning for threats. 30 seconds later, a quick confirmation was sent, and Avarus lighter shuttles powered down their engines and lowered their ramps, allowing the 2 Inquisitors and Rogue Trader to step out onto the shattered world. Otfar gestured to both of the powerful women to join him alongside their retinues. The Kolahat had a retinue of similar size to his own and similar in specialization. It was the retinue of Lady Captain Helena Vorhais that was more interesting to him. While she was accompanied by a seneschal, a lieutenant of her men-at-arms, as well as a pair of assassins, there were 2 figures that were the center of his attention for a few fleeting moments. Cassian Hale, known as Unyielding, was once an aspirant to Astral Knights, Adeptus Astartes chapter. A failed Astartes. An impressive asset, even by rogue trader standards. Especially impressive, seeing he had an honor of wearing a personal power armor, power sword, and insanely precious Volkite pistol. It was, in fact, the first time Otvar laid eyes on such a weapon. He was forced to threaten Epsilon 34 Darren with the highest of sanctions. For the moment he saw that unassuming weapon, he started creating plans of how to overthrow the entire Vorhais dynasty just to get his hands on this singular example of archaeotech. Otvar didn't want to start a war with a rogue trader dynasty, even as an inquisitor, especially one that some of his peers saw as unredeemable radical. Such war would be a political suicide. And while he was sure that this failed Astartes will prove his worth, it was a woman in magnificent black dress and veil covering her face, as well as strange collar on her neck. That was the greatest asset Vorhais provided, and the reason why he agreed for her to join them. Lyri Sable was a pariah, an untouchable, a blank. A rare asset indeed, and one that could prove to be beyond all worth on a world that was touched by the ruinous powers. He noticed how she kept her power-negating collar active and stood far in the back of the retinue. Even that was of little help, as he noticed how Herat was attempting to hide her grimace. Sable wasn't just any type of blank, she was a powerful blank. And even her collar, while limiting any devastating effect on nearby psychers, didn't stop the dreadful aura to make them feel uncomfortable. "Where to, Herat? Where does our path lead?" Otvar asked the diviner. Inquisitor looked around as if looking for something. She stopped for a moment, before allowing herself to show a slight smile. Where else to look for a priest? She started before pointing towards the city center, but in a temple. Otvar turned to look where she pointed. There was old ruined cathedral, not too far from Castro, which defenses were still active. "That's deep in the city center," Vorhais murmured, clearly unamused. "Right in the heart of darkness," Otvar agreed and let out a small chuckle. "I prayed to the Emperor for easy missions, but he always knows how to keep things interesting." Rogue Trader chuckled. "The Emperor helps those who help themselves, my good Inquisitor," Helena teased. "And we should have enough guns to punch through to the city center." One of her retinue cleared his throat. It was Seneschal, a man wearing modified Imperial Navy uniform, carapace armor, and was armed with power saber and plasma pistol. "Yes, Drelk?" Lady Captain asked. "Is it possible to reach the cathedral, or what is left of it, by air?" he asked. "I'm afraid not." Ulrich Tassor walked out of the dropship and joined everyone. "The cathedral is surrounded by rubble and overgrown plants, according to our scans. No clear landing zone, not to mention in range and line of fire of multiple turrets in that fortress. And finally, if the turrets in that pile of rubble are still somehow working, I won't bet against some lunatics with anti-air weapons ready to pounce." "Your best bet is to get there by foot." Otvar nodded, agreeing with his pilot assessment, but Herat turned to one of Astartes. "Can we hear your opinion, Sergeant Orlan?" she asked. The Death Watch sergeant, with a symbol of the Imperial Fists chapter on his pauldron, turned to look in their direction. He was the senior among all the sergeants, and leader of newly arrived Kill Team Griffin. Thanks to his seniority, he was given overall command over other kill teams by his superiors in Watch Fortress. Herat and Otfar didn't try to argue. Inquisitors of Ordo Xenos or not, only fools question the decision of a Watchmaster. The Son of Dawn gave a small nod.
I agree with your pilot's assessment of the situation. Only the kill teams can deploy there with relative ease, and lack of easy landing zone would mean that extraction of a target would be an additional challenge.
He looked at the Inquisitors.
But it is doable. We can be ready in 5 minutes, if you give the order.
Otfar and Herat looked at each other, reaching a silent agreement. Negative, Sergeant. While it's a quicker solution, I don't see it as a better one. There are many things we don't know about this world that need to be investigated as well. If we go by foot, we can discover more about the situation on the planet. Additionally, while I trust Herat's abilities, the power of foresight is fickle. We have no guarantee that our target is in the cathedral. There might be just few clues to their actual location. Clues that could be potentially destroyed in rapid deployment of freed kill teams.
Acknowledge, Inquisitor. We are awaiting further orders.
Was Imperial Fist's simple response. Good. We will move by foot towards the cathedral. Our stealth and recon specialists will go in front and on the flanks of the formation. Kill Team Aegis will take the front of the formation, where their recon abilities will shine. Griffin in the middle alongside the core of our retinues for additional protection. Kill Team Nemesis will protect our backs and be ready for quick redeployment. Otfar said in calculated tone, I want your men at arms in the middle with us. My stormtroopers will take care of the flanks of the formation. Herats will take front and back. 2 stormtrooper teams will stay with the dropships and await reinforcements to fortify our landing zone. If we find ourselves in difficult spot, we will use Valkyries to join us and give additional support if needed. Objections? None were raised, not even by the Astartes, but that was no surprise to Otfar. He led similar operations in the past. Then let's move out, he commanded. He wanted to make relatively quick progress through the city, but before they even left the confines of a spaceport, both Herat and single librarian that arrived alongside Kill Team Griffin stopped near the broken cordon. Otfar furrowed his brow, but approached, intrigued by what caught their attention. Skeletons. A flood of skeletons. At least on the first glance, but he quickly noticed that something wasn't right. The skeletons lay how they fell when dying. No signs of predators getting to the bodies. Some were still clothed, which didn't make any sense. What clothes could survive for, presumably, 6 millennia in open air? More concerning, however, were clear mutations. Some skeletons had horns or barbs or calcium tentacles coming out of them. Hoplitia never reported high population of mutants. He muttered to himself, kneeling down and taking a closer look. And those are quite extensive mutations.
Mutations created by a warp storm?
His interrogator Astra asked, kneeling next to him.
Such things are known to occur.
A simple explanation, and a reasonable one at that. But both of them knew that something wasn't right here.
No.
A towering figure of librarian Tariel Darant of the Blood Ravens boomed over them as he kneeled as well.
Those mutations are post-mortem.
Otvar's blood ran cold as he looked at the mass of skeletons in new light. Such extensive mutations to appear in corpses was unusual. Warp preferred to touch the living in such a way, not the dead. That's not all, Herat said with a tinge of fear. Those skeletons, some of them are very old, but some of them are quite new. Look there. She pointed at one part of the pile. See this? How the skeletons fuse there? The one at the bottom is a newer one, when the top one is millennia older. Otvar turned his attention to the pair of skeletons and suppressed a shudder. They were fusing almost perfectly, but the top one was darker and brownish, indicating its age, while being also symmetrical, when the lower one was clearly bone white, but unlike the top skeleton, it was full of mutations and abnormalities. How is that possible? Otvar muttered, focusing on the thin line where bones of both skeletons were fusing with each other. The fuse line, it's clear and sharp. It's not progressive fusion, more like one fell into the other and fused on its way down, creating this clean-cut distinction.
I would suspect witchery, but I heard not of a witch who would create such a bizarre thing.
Astra said with clear concern in her voice.
Doesn't look like the work of the demons either.
Librarian added.
Some of them are known to work with bone, but they create monuments, not...
He pointed at the bizarre sight before them.
this.
Otvar looked at the bones for a few moments longer, noting the myriad of mutations that apparently appeared after death, before standing up. Ordo Malleus will want to know about this. He summoned one of the servo skulls with a gesture. Make picts and scans of this, and prepare it to be sent after the mission is concluded. Skull confirmed with a small chirp, and went to work. Otvar rubbed his chin. Any idea what or who could cause such a thing? He asked two psychers. Both shook their heads. This is the first time I see something like this. It doesn't make sense, even by the standards of dealing with the warp. Herat concluded, standing up as well.
I can hear the echoes of the lost.
Librarian added after a moment.
Though some of them are ancient and some of them are young, both share the same cry. They want to escape.
Astartes rose to his full height.
Something truly foul happened on this world. I do not yet know what, and I'm unsure if I ever want to find out.
Otvar turned to continue, only to be met with steady gaze of Orlon. Blue lights of his helmet focused on him. We will continue to record anomalies while trying to keep a good pace. The wider Inquisition should be intrigued by our findings here, he stated and moved forward. Imperial Fist gave a slight inclination of the head before joining the march. As they walked, Otvar looked around the ruined city, and every step he took was making him more and more uncomfortable. The fusion wasn't limited to skeletons only. An ancient wreck of Macarius' tank was fused with relatively new chimera and still rotting corpse of a horse that had only one eye in the middle of the head. 14 tentacle-like tongues, all calcified to the point of resembling stone, were gripping a skeleton of a small child who looked at the passing servants of the throne with eyes filled with unnaturally white flowers that didn't reflect the crimson light of the system's star. One of the buildings, a housing block, looked as if multiple twisted versions of it were fused together. One was clearly a building that was in the middle of exploding. The next was perfectly clean and colorful. The other was made of bones of man and beast alike. One more was made of still living flesh and unblinking eyes. All of them occupied the same space and were fused in a confusing mosaic of anarchy. There was also a mechanical spider-like creature made out of trains, cars, speeders, tanks, and at least few aircraft. It was overgrown, dead, and unmoving. Dozens of skeletons were dangling beneath the thing, all hanged by the still wet and bloody intestines that caused a chill to run down Inquisitor's spine, especially when he noticed that all skeletons were holding hands, now fused with cancerous, mutated growths. Such images repeated again and again. But it wasn't all. For the city, despite the appearances, wasn't dead. Strange metallic insects were flying between numerous flowers. Birds that seemed to mock the aquila with their twin heads were singing a dreadful tune over their heads. A half-rat, half-snake observed them from one of the tree branches with all 16 of his eyes, most of which weren't located on his skull. An oversized chicken with sharp blades instead of feathers carried a small lizard with too many limbs and tentacles from one end of a street to another, only to be suddenly snatched by a statue that turned out to be a gigantic, oversized frog. There were also other distant sounds, even those of gunshots, and something which resembled human screams or shouts. "This is the most dreadful place I've seen all my life," Helena said, stepping over a crab that chose a skull of an infant for its shell. "And I'm over 2 centuries old. This place is sick and twisted, but this is no demon world," Herat said, keeping her attention on their surroundings. "The warp infects every part of this world, but I do not feel demonic presence."
Neither do I.
The librarian of the Death Watch agreed, focusing his eye on the train locomotive, which sat on top of a very thin and unnaturally tall streetlight and balanced on the very top of it.
This world. I do not know what to make of it.
Where is Ordo Xenos when you need them?
Astra asked, very pointedly avoiding a perfectly round hole of unnaturally crystal clear water. "Doing something more important than being here, I'm afraid." Otvar tried to lighten the mood with slight jest, though I doubt if even they could come up with a better idea other than exterminatus. "We could try to call for some help to do just that," Helena proposed. "No, we can't." Herat shook her head. "Hoplitia is now within Tau's sphere of influence. If we destroy this world, they will know something is up. If Inquisition decides to destroy this world, it will have to happen during the Crusade." Just as she said that, Orlon stopped in his tracks, before looking around and pointing at a perfect ring of fused vehicles with centrally placed elevation made of fused bones and plasteel support.
Move there. Create defensive positions. Now.
He ordered. Otfar and Herat didn't know why, but didn't doubt a veteran Deathwatch sergeant when told to take defensive position. Otfar activated his Vox beat. "All units, regroup at my position. Prepare for defensive action," he shouted. "Move it, you void rats!" Helena called to her men-at-arms as she picked up the speed. Herat didn't need to say a thing, as her soldiers already followed Otfar's example. Superhumans and mortals alike climbed on top of the ring of vehicles, using what they could to get on top. Some waited on the edge of the ring, waiting for those who were in the back of the formation or on the flanks. Just as stormtroopers that were securing the flanks arrived, bolter fire could be heard from not far away. Otfar tensed, pulling out his hell pistol and power sword, before looking back at Orlon. "Report, Sergeant! What are we dealing with?" Inquisitor demanded.
A horde of humanoid mutants, Inquisitor.
Imperial Fist specified.
Kill Team Aegis noticed the horde moving through the city at the distance. They suddenly changed directions. Aegis slows them down as we set up defenses here. If they are just migrating, our guns should scare them off well enough.
Sergeant said as heavy weapons specialist with heavy bolter climbed on top of a central mount to have the best firing arc. "Or we will have to kill all of them," Otfar said in grim tone, before changing frequencies. "Ulrich, do you hear me?" "I read you, Inquisitor," the pilot answered moments later. "We encountered a horde of mutants. They are moving in our direction, and in the direction of a spaceport as well. Have gunships in the air and ready to fire, or, even more likely, make a run to our position for extraction. We are taking defensive position on a roundabout." "Understand, Inquisitor. The moment you give a call, we will fly to retrieve you," Ulrich answered in a calm tone. Over and out. Otfar looked back, only to see the rear guard and kill team Nemesis join the defensive. "ETA, Orlon."
12 seconds for Aegis to arrive. 32 seconds for the horde to reach us.
Imperial Fist answered in stoic tone. 10 seconds for Aegis to arrive. 30 seconds for the enemy to arrive. Watch your fire!" Otfar shouted over the growing tremble of the ground. Something, what now he recognized, was the sound of hundreds, if not thousands of limbs crawling and running and jumping with animalistic, blind instinct. A few seconds later, Team Aegis ran out at full sprint, moving at truly breakneck speed, even by Astartes standards. They didn't even climb, just jumped up, using the inertia of their sprint to clear the tall barrier or land on top of it. Demigods and mortals alike lined up on the defensive ring, some finding openings or hatches in the fused mass of machines, allowing them to find more secure firing positions. 4 Astartes, one with heavy bolter and one with plasma cannon, stood near the top of the mount. They were accompanied by 2 snipers, with their rifles ready. One heavy weapon specialist with a heavy flamer stood just next to the edge, ready to burn the horde. Assault marines were waiting with grenades in hand, knowing well that jumping in the middle of a horde, jetpack or not, wouldn't be ideal. Krav and Trav stood near the edge, one armed with hand cannon revolver and chain axe, the other with a ripper gun and sizable power mace. The librarian's eyes flared with golden light as he focused, ready to defend his allies or bring unimaginable destruction upon his enemies. Otfar stood proudly alongside his retinue, Herat and Lady Captain Vorhais not too far away, all armed and ready. They heard the screeching, unholy, inhuman sounds of a horde, their claws digging into asphalt, stone and metal as they closed in. They were close. Very close. They would be swarming them any seconds now. Silence. Otvar blinked. Mere seconds ago, a giant swarm of monsters was to flood the empty space between the buildings and roundabout. He heard the untold thousands of clawed limbs scraping the ground moments before, and yet nothing revealed itself. Men-at-arms of a rogue trader looked between each other, while stormtroopers and Astartes held their position, slowly scanning their surroundings. Otvar felt the cold sweat flow down his back as he listened in. Total silence. Not even the dreadful songs of unnatural nature of this world could be heard. Then Cassian, the failed Astartes, quietly pointed at one of the windows. Otvar slowly turned his eyes there and froze. There was something there. A thin, yet muscular humanoid arm was slowly opening a window with the smallest of sounds. Whatever it once was, human or beast, now it was a monster. Its flesh looked as if it was made of burnt meat and cancerous growths. Each hand had different numbers of fingers, and each ended with sharp claw. A lipless mouth, full of sharp fangs and human-like teeth, was closed shut in impossible grimace. A deep hole in the middle of the face hid a singular eye, with elongated slit reaching all the way to the top of the head, where air moved alongside the creature's breath. Its ribcage was growing out of its torso in form of sharp blades, and overgrown spine created sharp spikes on its back and long, whip-like tail. Otvar observed as it slowly opened the window and leaned out, looking at them. Dozens more appearing in windows, not just from the direction the horde arrived from, but all around them. Sewer covers were lifted, revealing more creatures slowly peeking out, showing more and more of bizarre mutations. Some of the beasts seemed to materialize on top of the surrounding buildings, phasing out of roof tiles and standing impossibly straight, tall and proud, or hunched over in shame in an impossibly curled way. The silence stretched as both sides, one pure of blood and mind, and one warped beyond all comprehension, observed the other. They looked at each other with the equal amount of interest, disgust, and hatred. Yet none moved. It was as if a spell fell upon them all. The spell of unholy silence. One broken by an impossibly loud roar, an inhuman noise of hunger, hatred, and madness. One so deep it shook the bones of Adeptus Astartes. All beasts turned in the direction they came from, before turning back towards the servants of the throne. The first beast opened its mouth, revealing a second set of teeth and indescribable tongue. "Fire at will!" Otvar shouted, not allowing the beast to gain any kind of initiative. He fired his hell pistol straight into the eye of the first beast, creating a clean hole through its skull. Everyone else fired as well. Hotshot lasguns, hellguns, plasma pistols, bolters, heavy bolters, plasma cannon, flamethrower, grenade launchers, and even Volkite pistol joined the choir of the Emperor's defiant servants. It was answered by inhuman sounds escaping the monstrous horde that charged them from all directions. The beasts charged with no care for their own safety and almost no sign of pain. In fact, to Otvar's horror, this very same monster he shot rose to its feet, as if the gaping hole in the middle of its head was nothing but a minor inconvenience. Other monsters showed similar resilience, still charging despite being riddled with smoking holes. Bolters worked the best, blowing beasts apart. Flamers burned them, making them scream in pain. Plasma eradicated their flesh.
Target their limbs. Throw grenades.
Orlon shouted as the first of the monsters jumped towards the barricade, only to be met with shield bash from Imperial Fist and cut in two by Power Sword. Some stormtroopers pulled out their chainswords, joining Krav in cutting at the crawling beasts. Assault marines and one Black Shield infiltrator stood by their side, cutting the monsters as their bodies piled up around the defensive ring. Zahel Ordan of Nova Marines was screaming in defiance as his heavy flamer engulfed entire sections of the swarm. Librarian Darant released a chain lightning that jumped between monsters, burning them to ashes as he chanted the words of battle meditation. A heavy bolter barked, cutting entire swathes of monsters, as heavy plasma gun was ripping entire chunks out of a swarm. The Ripper gun was barking alongside them as Traff let out a bestial roar, trying to outmatch the swarm. Astarte sniper rifles fired again and again, each shot taking out beasts that seemed to observe the bloodbath and, maybe, coordinate the bestial host. The Tech Priest used bizarre weapons attached to his body and mighty axe of the Omnissiah to push back the swarm of monsters. One of his weapons firing a lance of sunlight that cut through the swarm, leaving dozens of monsters dead. Assassins and combat specialists added their experience to the slaughter, doing all they could to stop the mutants from getting close. But even with all of that, with dozens of trained Inquisitorial stormtroopers and men-at-arms of a rogue trader, 15 Deathwatch Space Marines, retinues of 2 Inquisitors and a rogue trader, it wasn't enough. The first soldier was dragged into the mass of claws and sharp teeth, only to be ripped into small chunks of flesh. Then the second, then the third. One Astarte's chainsword coughed as cancerous flesh started to clog the machine. Krav let out a screech of pain as beasts managed to cut his left hand apart, taking its and his handcannon with it. Trav ran up to his brother, doing his best to keep him safe in face of a swarm. Plasma guns slowed their fire to not overheat and kill the defenders. Flamers started to let out liquid flame in short bursts as they started to run out of promethium. Even the sound of a heavy bolter changed its tone, indicating that ammunition was running low. "Ulrich, to me!" Otvar shouted as he cut one of the beasts in two. He heard a small ping as confirmation but couldn't guess when he would arrive. The situation that seemed manageable at first turned more and more chaotic by the second, as the numbers of the swarm only grew despite the growing piles of bodies on top of which the beasts had to crawl on top of to get to the defenders. Otvar cursed under his breath, considering if he could use his rings, many of which were worth to him more than even an Astartes. Sadly, most of them were one-shot gadgets and would fall apart after one shot. Others would need weeks, if not more, to recharge on their own. Could he really sacrifice something like this? As he saw another 3 soldiers getting dragged into the mass of claws and hate, and as one of the marines struggled to resist being dragged alongside them, he decided that he could. He extended his right hand and fired the first digital weapon. This one released a wave of white flame that washed over the horde before him. The monsters were so closely bunched up as they tried to get to the servants of the Emperor that this one shot erased maybe even 100 of them out of existence. Quite literally. The white flame erased the monsters, burning them to ash and turning the ground into the molten stone and steel. The sight of such power coming out of a simple-looking ring almost stunned even the mighty Astartes, before Otvar roared. "Reload! Tariel, help me!" was his command as he changed position, ignoring the dreadful feeling of a digital weapon breaking into pieces. Librarian didn't need another command as he drank in more power from the warp. Using his staff as focus, he released a combined strike of lightning and flame. Almost everyone else started to quickly reload their weapons, if they could. Mere fractions of the seconds were bought by each powerful strike, and more would be needed if the servants of the Emperor were to prevail. Otvar changed position, raising his left hand this time and using another digital weapon. This time there was a flash of white light, and another 100 monsters died. This time, all of them were turned into stone, their hateful visages still screaming, before being shattered under the renewed charge of their kin. The Librarian moved as well, using all his power to devastating effect, but the moment his flame and lightning stopped reaching the swarm, more of the beast would crush the charred remains of their kin and continued their mindless charge. Right hand again. This time a black smoke escapes a ring in a cone, turning flesh, bone, stone and steel into liquid that quickly hardens and fuses with one another. The ring breaks. Left hand, an equivalent of a tank-sized melta cannon, reduces another 100 monsters into nothing but ash. The ring breaks. Otvar reached the place where Librarian started his run, and despite the fact that they both killed hundreds of the beasts, they were already mere meters from the defensive line. In desperation, Otvar raised both hands and sacrificed 2 rings in a devastating strike. The monsters on his right were frozen in frost, before crumbling into small pieces. The monsters on his left blew apart as if exposed to vacuum, their blood flowing in all directions and painting the ground in black gore. 6 rings. 6 rings. He sacrificed 6 rings. And he had only 2 left. And the horde seemed unmoved by the death of maybe 1,000 of their kin. They just kept going, running and screeching with bestial delight of chaotic slaughter that was to come. The death was meaningless, the pain was a joke, their numbers would do the trick. Otfar knew they were running out of time. A moment of small hope came as the heavy bolter fired once more in a stream of righteous fury, other weapons joining in with renewed vigor, those few seconds being more than enough to reload and recharge their guns. But even at that moment, Otfar knew it wouldn't be enough. The monsters were still swarming all around them. They were crawling from underground, rushing through the streets, jumping out of windows, flowing over the rooftops. The rooftops? Otfar's eyes widened as he saw a gigantic, disfigured hand grab 4 of the monsters before disappearing behind the building. There was a sickening crunch and screeches of pain and despair. The horde froze for a moment in place, ignoring the incoming shots, before all of them echoed the sound of true fear and terror and started to run away in all directions, abandoning their mad assault. All guns fell silent, just as the mass of the monsters disappeared out of view, just as quickly as it swarmed them. Once again, an accursed silence fell upon them all. But it was not real silence. Something moved behind the building. Something big and heavy. Inquisitor's heart skipped a beat as a gigantic hand gripped the wall of the building moments before the owner of said hand stepped out into the full view. "Emperor, protect us all," Otfar whispered as he witnessed the thing in all its horrible glory. To call it a monster would be unjust to monsters. The thing had 3 main legs and 3 main arms, but each limb seemed to be made of stretched out skin, ripped flesh, and mutated bone. Hands and claws and spines of men and beasts tried to break out of the mass of each limb. Some were even grasping the air or ripping into the flesh as if trying to escape. The bulk of the body seemed to be made of cancerous, melting flesh that hung from the body yet didn't break from it. Elongated bone blades and bone hooks somewhat keeping the whole thing together. On top of it all, there was a gigantic head with a massive, singular eye in the middle of the skull. But it wasn't the only eye. Quite the opposite. There were dozens of them, maybe even hundreds. Crimson round gems, fused with flesh and bone, looking in all directions or blinking frantically. Bone blades were growing out of its back, where multiple monsters they encountered moments before were impaled and slowly fusing with the main body. A long, disfigured tail was breaking into 2, with the tip of each tail growing multiple skulls that were chopping at the air, limbs forming and trying to break free. The thing towered over them, raising to over 10 meters tall. It was bigger than an Imperial Knight, maybe even as tall as a Warhound Titan. Otfar couldn't guess if that thing was crouching or standing straight. The monstrous thing turned all of its eyes towards the servants of the Imperium, still chewing and spilling sickly black blood onto the ground. Otfar's mind raced with questions. What was that unholy thing? A predator of the smaller beasts? Something from which beasts were born from, seeing they try to grow out of it? Was it some kind of leader? A chaos construct? So many questions. And Otfar neither knew the answers, nor would he seek them out. For at that moment, he was sure of one thing above all others. He, Baltic Otfar, Radical Inquisitor of Ordo Xenos, a man with over 3 centuries of service, witness to genocides, horrors and wonders that would remain secret to all but he and few others, was never more terrified than in this very moment. Otfar blinked in shock. It could speak. The thing let out an human, gurgling noise as it made the first step towards its new prey. Fire! Vorhais shouted an order, and despite her lack of authority over many present, none argued. At once, dozens of laser beams, streams of bolter shells, and plasma hit the creature, that let out another gurgle. Flesh burned, was ripped apart or melted, but the thing seemed unfazed. It let out a happy gurgle as it made another deliberate step. Otfar realized that it was chuckling to itself, laughing at all the fire that they could bring against it. He didn't even raise his pistol. He just watched as the thing made one more step and started to reach out towards the defenders. It was then when a series of rockets and 2 beams of deadly light hit it right in the torso, throwing it back. Otfar almost fell on his backside as gun cutter flew past them and voice of Ulrich sounded through the vox.
I knew calling for the cutter was a good decision.
Ulrich said smugly, despite incoming anti-air fire from ruined fortress.
Going for another run.
Otfar smiled as he figured out what to do. Agreed, go for another run, try to push it away from us, then return to the spaceport, he ordered. Orlon, stay with me. Everyone else, run! He ordered, and seeing everyone's momentary confusion, he shouted again. Now! They didn't need to be told thrice, as everyone but one Astartes made a run for it, just as the cutter made the turn and started gunning straight at the beast. The monstrous thing was roaring now, with its main jaws and dozens of those fused into its flesh. The sound of indignation, hatred, and madness. Otfar looked at one of the remaining rings on his hand. This one wouldn't break, but there was a good chance it would kill him and Orlon. But it will also for certain kill the monster. Adhere yourself to the surface and hold me, Marine, he ordered. This one, he raised the golden ring with inquisitorial rosette, is special. Imperial Fist nodded, saying nothing, either not caring or being too stoic to care that this might be their death.
Enemy in my sights. Firing.
Ulrich said over the vox. Another series of rockets, beams of las cannons, and traces of autocannons slammed into the monstrosity, pushing it back another few steps. Satisfied with the distance between him and the creature, Otvar waited for the cutter to pass overhead and moved the appropriate distance away. Imperial Fist took a good hold of him, making him feel he might survive this. He took a deep breath, aimed with his finger, and fired. A small black ball escaped the ring and flew straight into the monster's chest. Everything went silent for a split second before the monster let out a bizarre screech, but was cut short as the black ball grew in size, sucking in the air, flesh, bone, and everything else. Otvar felt the Orlon's grip tighten as a miniature black hole grew, consuming the entirety of the monster before their very eyes. Rubble, dust, and bodies of smaller beasts were picked by the pull of a hole in reality and flew straight into it. It stayed there for only a second, yet it felt as if it hovered there for days, its very presence bending the space and time. The Inquisitor stared right into the abyss before it collapsed on itself. There was a sonic boom as air filled the void, the crash of flying rubble and bodies, and then blessed silence. Orlon waited a few seconds before letting Otvar go. The Inquisitor fell to his knees and took a thankful breath of air. He grimaced, feeling how the overheated ring was burning his flesh, but he didn't dare to take it off. It would take weeks, if not months, for the ring to recharge, and he wouldn't dare to part with it for a second.
This was very dangerous weapon to use,
Astartes said after a moment of silence. I was kind of out of alternative ideas, Otvar answered with a dry throat. Even a cutter did little more than irritate the thing. He looked up at the Marine. What, you had something better in mind, Sergeant? There was a moment of silence between them before Astartes shook his head.
No.
Otvar chuckled, said like a true son of Dorn. He rose to his feet only to see the rest of the expedition returning. Some of them were wounded, all of them were shaken. Even Astartes looked up at him in new light. Otvar noticed how Rogue Trader eyed him with positively hungry eyes. He promised himself that he will find a way to relax after this mission. He wouldn't mind doing so in the company of a Rogue Trader. Alright people, take a breather. 10 minutes, then we move out, he said loudly. We still have the Seeker to find. None objected. In fact, all of them looked grateful at the prospect of moment of rest. Otvar, with all the grace he could muster, sat on his ass and pulled out his canteen. Good Emperor, why so many adventures? He muttered to himself as he took a sip from his trusty Inquisitorial canteen.